Hello, I'm Stephen Missick, and welcome to this episode of Voice of the Word. In this program, I want to talk about persecution of Christians around the world and what can we do about it. And I also want to talk about a little bit more about my series on the lives of the 12 apostles. This is my book, The Lives of the 12 Apostles According to Abdias of Babylon, or Obadiah of Babylon, disciple of Jesus Christ. And the tradition is that Abdias of Babylon is one of the 70 disciples, and he wrote a chronicle of the lives of the 12 apostles. So I want to look at a description of the appearance of St. Paul, which is preserved in Aramaic accounts.
Jesus was an Aramaic-speaking Jew of the Middle East, and the Assyrians are Aramaic-speaking Christians in the Middle East who have endured persecution for over 1,000 years. Join Voice of the Word Aramaic Bible teacher, artist, and author Stephen Missick as he examines the Bible through the ancient languages, peoples, lands, cultures, and times in which it was first revealed. Research the Scriptures, rescue persecuted Christians, and restore the Church to its Semitic roots. And now, Voice of the Word.
Right now, there's a lot of violence against Christians going on in Africa. And tens of thousands of Christians in Nigeria are being slaughtered. And also, we've had beheadings of Christians in Mozambique and other places across the continent. So, why is this happening? Well, Africa is a troubled continent, and actually, I've been to North Africa, of course, I've been to Egypt, but we're talking about sub-Saharan Africa, which is kind of a different region. North Africa is really the Middle East and part of the Arab world, but Black Africa, if that's what you want to call it, the sub-Saharan Africa. And, of course, Africa is beset with a lot of problems. Now, when I served in Iraq, we had a lot of Ugandan soldiers who were stationed there with us, who were assisting our mission. And they would come to chapel, and I befriended a lot of Ugandans. And so when I finished that deployment, I was able to go and visit Africa, and I had a good time in Uganda. But there's some interesting things that I saw over there. And there's a lot of corruption in Africa. And we see that in Nigeria. There's a lot of these scams, a lot of the scammers, the Nigerian prince scam, that's from Nigeria. Right? And I think what happened is back in the 90s, you had the Rwanda, the Hutus versus the Tutsis. And I think in a certain sense, the international community just looked at Africa and kind of gave up on it. Let's just disengage. Let's not get involved. And there's a lot of diplomatic and social pressure put on South Africa because you had a white minority rule. And now South Africa is falling apart. The African National Congress is a communist organization, always has been, and there's a lot of racial tensions and discrimination against the white minority now, and a lot of them are having to flee for their lives. So there's a lot of problems in Africa. And like I said, I remember, I think his name is Bruce Wilkinson. He wrote The Prayer of Jabez. And he was all excited. He was going to go to Africa and minister there. But then he deals with, the problems in Africa of corruption. He kind of just gave up. But I saw this when I was in Uganda. I didn't have any problems there. But China is looking at Africa and wants to dominate that continent. And what's going on, just open your eyes. Islam is not just a religion, it's a political system bent on global domination. And they look at Africa as territory that they want to win over as part of an international Islamic conquest. So the Chinese, I was amazed when I was in Uganda to see the Chinese presence and talk to Ugandans about because the Chinese want to have global dominance too, just like the radical Muslims. And, it's like, well, if the rest of the world's not going to engage in Africa, we will. And Africa, the Chinese will become part of their zone of influence. They're working on that. It's like Africa has problems now, but things could change, and this could be under Chinese control or influence later on. So they're looking at it strategically. The Muslims are looking at it strategically. And because Africa has these problems, poverty and other problems, the Christian population there is vulnerable. They're vulnerable. Now, when I was in Uganda, I lived in Egypt for a while. Egypt is about 10% Christian, right? Coptic Christian, probably more than that. But the government of Egypt is not going to. It's about representation in government. So, if the Coptic population is 15, 20, 25% of the population, then they would have to have representation in government, and the Muslim government's doesn't want Christians to have representation. So they actually say that Egypt's 6% Christian, which is absurd. If you travel around Egypt, you can tell there's a sizable Christian population in Egypt, but they don't want them to have a voice in their own government. So they lie about the numbers of Christians in Egypt. But just for the sake of simplicity, let's just say Egypt is about 10% Christian. And you're in Egypt, you hear the call to prayer all the time. So I was in Uganda, and Uganda is about 10% Muslims, 85% Christian Uganda is, and that's half evangelical, Pentecostal, Protestant, and half Roman Catholic. But the Muslim minority in Uganda is very active, very active. They also have a Hindu population because you have a lot of, the British brought a lot of Indians into Africa because the Indians were more skilled, had more skills that the British people needed to build up their colonial empire that the local Africans possessed. So you have a kind of a mercantile class of Indians. So there's a Hindu temple in Kampala as well. So they don't have public education in Africa in most places, or especially not in Uganda. So you have to send your child to school with money. All the schools are private. So the Muslims will give you a free education so they can brainwash your kids, right? So if the poor are vulnerable to that, right? So you send your kids to school. Happens here in the United States of America. Why are all these kids left wing? You're trying to set up your kids for success, but you have a corrupt institution. Your kids come back home totally whacked out on communism. Education is important. Education is very important. Poland used to be one of the strongest Protestant nations. What happened is the Jesuits went in there and they offered a free, high-quality education to the children of nobility back during the Protestant Reformation period. So what happened? Now it's one of the most extreme Catholic countries in Europe. We have to think about these things. We have to think strategically. So the Muslims look at Africa and they see the vulnerabilities and they want to exploit them. And like this Mr. Wilkinson, he gets frustrated. If God told you to do something, you need to do it and find a way. If God literally told him he needs to go and do ministry in Africa, if it doesn't work out in South Africa or somewhere else, he went and go somewhere else where it will work. That's what Jesus said. Jesus says, go from town to village. If they don't receive you, then dust off the dust off the shoes of your feet and go to the next place. We need to be concerned about Africa, and we need to be thinking strategically. The Muslims want to take over all of Africa, but the reality is right now Christianity is winning out. So now why Nigeria? Because Nigeria is half Christian, half Muslim. Wherever you have a population that has a large Muslim population up against a Christian, if it's Bosnia, if it's Lebanon, or India after colonization, right? Oh, they want special privileges. We're distinct people, and we're not like the Hindus. The English should never have partitioned India. It should have been one country or 10 or 20, not two nuclear powers at each other's throats all the time. They gave in to these. It's always the same thing. It's always the same thing. They should have said no. And because Nigeria is half Muslim, half Christian. Actually, the Christians tried to break off back in the 80s, I think, or maybe the 70s, and create a Nigerian Christian state called Biafra. But the English went in there and besieged the Christians of Nigeria and starved them out so that they have to submit to Islamic rule. So it probably would have been better if Biafra was able to achieve independence several decades ago instead of suffering as they are now. And probably the Christian population foresaw what was in their future and were taking steps to mitigate that by asserting independence. But the evil We speak English, and I've been to England. I loved England, I really did. But there's problems throughout history. The British doing terrible things. The Crimean War was insane. So the Russians are about to go in and destroy Islam forever in the Crimean War. So the British swoop in there to stop Russia from saving mankind. And now everything we suffer now is because of the British. They should stay out of that for the sake of mankind and human civilization. So there's many things. What the British did to the Assyrian people. They go and fight and die for the Allied cause, for liberty, justice, democracy. And the Assyrians fought for freedom. And then the British stab them in the back and turn the other way while they're subjected to genocide. And they actually pressure to put the patriarch of the Assyrian church. They exile him. The British exile the patriarch out of his homeland. So what I'm saying, we need to think about Africa. We have to be engaged in it. I was listening to a program yesterday by Victor Davis Hanson, and Van Jones, who's like a communist extremist, he's a commentator on CNN or MSNBC, these left-wing stations or news broadcast sites. And Van Jones had this very offensive statement. He says, "No Jews, no news." It's like everybody's talking about Israel. What about what's going on in Nigeria? What about the people being slaughtered there? I'm glad Van Jones is trying to bring attention to the situation. But Victor Davis Hanson was saying, well, it's a terrible thing to say. It's anti-Semitic, for one thing. He says, there are things going around the world that are not reported on the news media. You have to think why. Probably because there's certain stories that the CIA doesn't want people to talk about in the United States of America. But talk news radio, Fox, it's like somebody picks one news story for us to ruminate on all day, all day long, maybe 2 or 3 per day. There's a lot of things going on in the world that we need to be aware of, and we need a new paradigm, right? It's like, why talk about one news story for like these talk radio shows for 3 hours? People listen to it the whole time. It's so redundant, and they pick one story. They want you to, focus on this one thing. It's probably something asinine, some celebrity gossip or stuff like that, while important things are going on. So the Muslims, we talk about mission work and missionaries. The Muslims have a mission to conquer the world. And they look at Africa, it's like, how are we going to win this continent? For them, violence is a way to do it. It's worked throughout their 1,400 years of their history. It's paid rich dividends. Using terrorism has worked for them. So what we need to do is we need to be engaged with Africa. I saw this movie I want to recommend called Machine Gun Preacher about this guy was an ex-con. His wife got saved when he was in prison. So he comes out of jail. It's a good movie. And he comes out of jail and he wants to go back to life of crime. But then he's confronted with, I guess, his mortality, his soul. He gives his heart to Christ. He becomes a pastor. He goes and does work in Africa. I think in Uganda, not in the region I went, but more, there's like up in the north, there's near Sudan. I have to look on the map to see where Uganda is. I mean, I've been there, but there's a problem area. I was in the south near Lake Victoria. But in Sudan, you have these ethnic killings, and Uganda in a certain region has this problem. So he's going over, I believe it's Uganda, to help the community. So it's one pastor, an ex-con, a member of motorcycle gangs, became a preacher, machine gun preacher. So when I was a kid, I was going to Sugarland, it's like Sugar Creek, it's in the Sugarland area, Sugar Creek Baptist Church. Every year we had pastors, not pastors, it's just church members. I think they're probably contractors, but there are some church members in the church. It might have been deacons or elders. I doubt it. I think it's just church members. Out of the goodness of their heart, they would go to Africa every year to dig wells so that people would have access to water and clean water, because you got a lot of nasty water they're drinking, sometimes filled with sewage that causes them to have malaria, cholera, all these terrible diseases that brings death and misery. So they're going to Africa every year. You hear the left-wingers, oh, those Southern Christians, they don't care about the poor like we do. And it's like it's not true. See, that's the problem with the people on the left is they want to assign, they think they're better than everybody else, and they care, and you don't care like them. They assign you base or sinister motives, But actually, these people they despise are actually doing a lot more to practically help people than they ever would. So, yeah, this is back in late 80s, early 90s. These people were going over to Africa to dig wells. Well, we might have to go to Africa, do short-term mission work. Just short-term mission work, just go over there. But, we have a lot of veterans, like me. I've learned a lot of skills in soldiering, 30 years of military service. We might need to go over there and assist the Christians with security and teach them how to secure and protect themselves and their communities from these people. And and the other thing, what's going on? This is Saudi Arabia and Qatar sending money to these extremist groups to kill the Christians over there. We need to understand that Qatar and Saudi Arabia are state sponsors of terrorism. They might not be officially designated as that, but that's what they are. These are very evil nations. And when I went to Iraq, I was kind of thinking, it's like, why are we fighting in Iraq when the enemy is Saudi Arabia and these other Gulf states? I want to go over there and fight the real villains of this. Actually, Saddam Hussein was a bad guy, but Iraq was better under Saddam Hussein. The Christians had it better than they do now. The population of Christians, after we went there, we didn't benefit the country at all, as far as I could tell. I'm proud of my military service. I'm just looking at the facts of it. And I serve my country. I feel like I serve my country with honor, and I'm proud of my military service. But harm came to Iraq through that, and especially the Christian population, which is literally decimated. There's like 75% of the Christians of Iraq are gone now. And the numbers are continuing to decline. I think it's going to turn around soon, but that's where we're at now. And if we hadn't gone into Iraq, most of those Christians would still be there. And we need to support that community. So I want to mention something else, talking about security. Do you see this? You know what this is? This is the replica of a Frankish battle axe. What is a Frank? The Franks were Germanic people. They're a warrior people. And they were Germanic. They're the ancestors of the French, but they were Germanic, and I think the language, the modern living form of their language, its descendant, is actually it's Dutch from the Netherlands. They're the people of the Netherlands, Belgium, and France. Of course, the name Frank is still seen in France. That's where the word comes from. But Charles Martel, what happened is the Muslims were in central France, and they're going to the church of Saint Martin of Tours to destroy the church and to pillage it. Now, Saint Martin is a very famous early Christian saint. He had been a Roman soldier, and there's a story of him. Roman soldiers had these red capes they had to wear, which are issued to him, and he saw a naked elderly man, an old man on the side of the road begging, and it's cold, it's rainy, it's dreary. This man was so impoverished, he was sitting there naked, begging, just for a few, for a piece of bread. And as a Christian, he felt pity in his heart, and he had nothing to give this man. So he took his cape and he cut it, a piece of it, cut it in two. And with part of his cape, he clothed the naked man so that he'd be warm and covered. And then that night, that man appeared to St. Martin in a dream and transformed to Jesus Christ. And said, that was me. That was Jesus Christ took another form of that man. Jesus said, I was hungry and you gave me food. I was naked and you clothed me. This is Matthew 25. And it's a very powerful story. Anyway, the cape of St. Martin of Tours is kept in this chapel in Tours and Poitiers. And the Muslims were going down there. This is where I was a chaplain. That's where the word chapel came from, because you had a soldier that guarded the cape of St. Martin of Tours. So the soldier priest was a chaplain. So the Muslims were in central France. They conquered Spain. They're trying to conquer France. They're in the central France. And Charles Martel, he got his warriors. They armed with battle axes, and you probably had like 100,000 versus Muslim warriors, jihadis, mujahideen, going against maybe 10,000 or so, maybe a little more Frankish Christian warriors. and they should have been. They were able to. Charles Martel was able to defeat the Muslims and drive them out, save Christian Europe. So all the benefits that we have from Western civilization was won through a Frankish battle axe. And afterwards, the Muslims actually sacked Rome a couple of times. I'll talk about that in the 800s. But Charles Martel, means Charles the Hammer, his grandson was Charlemagne. So what if Charles Martel didn't fight back against Islam and Spain and Italy and Germany? What if Catholicism was like the Coptic Church, small persecuted minority? What would have happened? What kind of world we live in if Charles Martel didn't fight back? Force of arms has been one of the few things that has sent Islam back. Now we're in a new world where we can use argumentation and debate. And the Quran is not an impressive book. The Hadith are embarrassing, and it cannot stand scrutiny. And we need to, when we have these things going on, Christians need to be educated about Islam. And we need to support anti-Muslim apologetics, Christian, and polemics. People like David Wood, Sam Shamoon, the Assyrian Encyclopedia. When they kill our brothers and sisters in Christ, we need to respond by going over there and helping those communities, as I tried to do. I did do. I had a good little visit over there. But we also need to respond with education to expose Islam for what it's done. There's a historian called Rodney Stark. He passed away. He wrote a book on the Crusades called God's Battalions, The Case for the Crusades. And the the left uses the Crusades as anti-Christian propaganda, but they're falsifying. It's historical revisionism. The Crusaders were the good guys. There's always atrocities in war, but sometimes you got to be. Look at the North. In the Civil War, they committed atrocities against the South. The concept of total war against Americans, not differentiating between soldiers and civilians, like burning Atlanta, an American city, to the ground. Americans city, the government burning down an entire, important to this day, Atlanta burnt down. Atrocities and war crimes. But do people demonize? Well, maybe we should reevaluate that, but they don't. People don't do that. They look at it in a simplistic way. Slavery's bad as it was, and we look at, even though the North under Grant and Stewart committed atrocities, they still look at the North as the good guy and the South as the bad guys. So that's how we should look at the Crusades. The Christians are the good guys. And Saladin, he was not much different from the Ayatollah Khomeini or Osama bin Laden. He was a vicious Muslim warlord. And he had this fictitious presentation. It's based on literature, not on historical facts about Saladin. So this is an important issue, and I want to talk about some more issues, get back to the focus on the Assyrians and Aramaic. But I want to mention a book I wrote called The Hammer of God. And I wrote about Judah Maccabee. You see, the reality is we face, they're allied together. The church faces a demonic enemy, and it's the left. It's the Democrat Party. It's the progressive movement. It's socialism, communism. It's AOC, Bernie Sanders, those people. They're the enemies of God and mankind. I've had enough of them. And we have to people get offended. I'm offended by these organizations. They're atheists, the new atheism pushed by the Democrat Party. Just a few years ago, they actually booed God at the Democrat National Convention. I know we have problems with the Republican Party. I'm fully aware of that, and probably no one criticized the Republican Party more than me. That's why we got Trump, because people the conservatives are fed up with the Republican Party. And it's a reaction against the disservice we've had from the Bushes, McCains, the Romneys, these villains. So the left, however, is an enemy to Christianity. I mean, look at what they do, Hollywood, the entire establishment, and Islam. So you have these two enemies of Christianity right now: radical left-wing progressivism and radical Islam. And they work together, and we have to oppose them. So to help people understand that, I did this book about Judah Maccabee. Maccabee in Aramaic means the hammer, Judah the Maccabee, Judah the hammer. He fought against, I think it's a kind of a metaphor for, we see, like, they don't want you to say BC and AD, before Christ in the year of our Lord. We don't want to use that terminology. Just a total Greek. They're anti-Christian. The left is anti-Christian. You can't say Merry Christmas. It's a cultural war against Christianity. It's just like this Peacemaker show, The Handmaid's Tale. You see it all over the place. A lot of Tim Burton's movies, the Wednesday TV show. They're constantly and incessantly attacking Christianity. The left does, and they're working with the Muslims. So with the Maccabees, you had Antiochus Epiphanes, and he's trying to forcibly assimilate the Jews into a pagan culture. That's what's going on right now. They're trying to forcibly assimilate us into their neo-paganism of, it's anti-biblical. They hate the Bible. They hate God. They hate Jesus Christ. And they're trying to forcibly assimilate, like we see in our educational institutions. We see it in entertainment. They've allied themselves with the Muslims. So first we see, it's the same thing. Judah Maccabee, the Syrian Greeks are trying to forcibly assimilate the Jews into, and they start, first off, it's just cultural pressure. Then it goes into violence, right? So they're going to kill you or arrest you for believing the Bible. It comes to that. That's what happened. And finally, with their backs to the wall, the Maccabees had to fight back. And they shouldn't have been able to win. They had no military training experience. They're going against one of the strongest militaries in the world at that time. They were able to achieve victories and win religious freedom. Once again, through force of arms. They had to fight. They didn't want to fight. They were forced to fight. The Maccabees. If Antiochus Epiphanes and the Syrian Greeks were successful, there would be no Judaism. There'd be no Bible. It's like, well, what about the Greeks of the Greek-speaking Jews in Alexandria? They had the Septuagint at that time. They would have withered at the vine. Life, their sustenance came from the Holy Land, from the temple in Jerusalem. If the Greeks totally assimilated, wiped out Judaism as they were trying to do, then Jesus wouldn't have come. This is a historically altering, right? They're trying to eradicate Judaism. Judah Maccabee led the people to victory and preserved the Bible for us and religious. This was like the first war for religious freedom. And they had to force the Greeks. Finally, the Greeks said, okay, we're tired of this war. You want to have religious freedom, you can have it. We're going to repeal all these laws and restrictions against the Bible, against practicing the Bible. The Assyrian Christians, this day, honor the Maccabean martyrs. In August, you have the feast days, the festival of Mart Shemuna, who is the woman and her 7 sons who were put to death for their adherence to the scriptures. So this is still meaningful to the Assyrian people. So I wrote this book, The Hammer of God, about 2 hammers. Judah Maccabee, Judah the Hammer in Aramaic, and then Charles Martel, Charles the Hammer in Latin. So like I said, it's a metaphor, a symbol of Bible believers being persecuted for their faith by the left, which is kind of what Antiochus Epiphanes symbolizes, and then Charles Martel against radical Islam. So these 2 forces of evil, the radical, secular, progressive left, and radical Islam, they're allied together. And one of the things that Victor Davis Hanson said, which is true, is that, well, there's another reason why they're not going to report on Nigerian Muslims killing Christians. Because they're allied with the Muslim community. It's propaganda. Their narrative is that Muslims are an aggrieved people. They're victims. And if they present the facts that that's not the case, then all their narratives fall apart, right? They don't want to portray Christians as victims ever, no matter where they are in the world. CNN and NBC, they're evil. They are evil. Don't watch it. It's satanic. And before I go on, I also want to mention something about the Crusades, right? That's not the way to look at it. The Crusades from 1099 till probably the 1300s. You had five Crusades, but in the reality, this war started in the year 622, and it's going on today. This is a 1,400 year war. It's the jihad. This is the longest war ever waged in world history. A 1,400 year war that's just still going on. A war of global conquest. And the Crusades were just merely skirmishes or battles in a 1,400 year war, which is ongoing and will continue until Islam is no more changed from what it is now. And we just need to be cognizant. That's the reality of what's going on. It's a 1,400 year war of global conquest. That's how they think about it. And that's why they're targeting Africa right now. They want that continent. And if we don't wake up and support our brothers and sisters in Christ, they will dominate that continent, just like they're on the verge of dominating Europe. But God is going to intervene, but we have a part to play. Read about the apostles and what they suffered. And, you know, here in the West, we have this idea of the rapture. The idea is that, well, you know, we're not going to have to suffer tribulation. God's just going to save us from that. Well, there's a lot of people who are suffering tribulation around the world. The apostles suffered. So why do American Christians think that the Lord's will for his chosen apostles, people he loved so much he spent his ministry with, his plan for, you know, all those who live godly in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution, except for American Christians, we're going to be raptured out. Read the book of Revelation. There's no rapture in the book of Revelation. The book of Revelation is about the church enduring trial and persecution and how they overcame through the blood of the Lamb of God and the word of their testimony. And there are struggles ahead for us. Jesus struggled for us. So Jesus has to endure tribulation, but not American Christians. We're just going to be raptured out of there before hard times come. That's what you think. There's no real biblical justification for that belief anyway. So a lot of it's like, oh, Muslims are having dreams and visions. Jesus didn't say, you sit back at home, you know, enslaved to your little phone, your smartphone, just a little, you know, playing stupid asinine video games all the time, and don't worry about the Great Commission. Jesus, I'll send dreams of. Is that how it works? Dreams and visions. I mean, God can use dreams and vision. I'm sure He is. That does not free us from the obligation of sharing the message of Jesus ourselves. And also, it's finally happening. We have to answer people who blaspheme and ridicule and mock. We have to provide an answer, and then it's so easy once you do it. We have the answer. We have the way. We have the truth. We have the life. And it's time for us to speak up. We need men of courage. And something else, this is something that Coptic Christian Raymond Ibrahim talks about, is Christian warriors throughout history. Like I said, if not for Charles Martel, where would we be? Muslims, that's where we'd be. Carolingian Renaissance. Charles Martel was the grandfather of Charlemagne. That was a Renaissance, an actual Renaissance under Charlemagne. If he didn't fight, if he didn't prevail against the Muslims, you would not have had a Charlemagne. If you didn't have a Carolingian Renaissance, you would not have had an Italian Renaissance. And we'd still be in the Dark Ages to this day. People talk about the 5,000 year leap, how since the time of Martin Luther till, okay, you look at 5,000 years of history and not really a lot of progress. But then during the Italian Renaissance, the Protestant Reformation, you know, now look at where, you know, we got space probes and at Pluto. We're on the verge of artificial intelligence, where we do have forms of artificial intelligence, technological wonders, planes, trains, automobiles. And do you think the Islamic world would ever have produced those things? You know, all that. Think of what if we didn't have Islam. Where do you think we'd be now? More advanced than we are now, because it's one of the most greatest retarded influences, retrograde influences in global history. Leading exporter of violence, poverty, and war and carnage. We have to be honest about it now. I mean, for the sake of mankind. And here we have people like Tucker Carlson getting bought off, joining the side of Sharia law. So it's time to stand up. I want to cover some more points before I finish this program. this is important. These are things that have to be said. I want to mention Mar Awa, the patriarch of the Assyrian Church of the East. He's going to be meeting with David Tam of China, and he's going to be giving a seminar, a theological lecture commemorating the 400th anniversary of the discovery of the, it calls it the Jingajiao Stela. This is a monument, what it means today's Church of the East. This is a monument. It's called the Nestorian Stone. It's called the Xi'an Stone. It's one of the so-called Jesus Sutras. In the year 781, the Chinese emperor erected a monument because in the year 636, an Assyrian named, probably, they call him Olopan. Maybe his name was Abraham. It's hard to say for certain what his name was. Probably Abraham, but they called him Olopan in Chinese. He walked the Silk Road. He took the gospel to China and preached before the Chinese emperor of the Tang Dynasty in the year 636. And so, the Chinese civilization, I don't know, sometimes there's things I admire about Chinese civilization, but they have a tendency to be racist and xenophobic. If you look through their history, they have, I don't know, it's a great civilization. You gotta respect the Chinese, but they do have, so during the Tang Dynasty, the Chinese people were very outward looking and is a high point of Chinese civilization, one of the high points. Because you have these cycles, you have cycles of xenophobia, and sometimes you have more enlightened dynasties. We even, the Western civilization has these problems too, as we see in World War II. Some of the ideologies that came about in Europe. So Chinese civilization has the same problems that other cultures and civilizations do. But this was a very enlightened period in Chinese history, and they were outward looking. And this Assyrian Christian called Alopan, probably named Abraham, preached before the Tang emperor. And the emperor looked upon Christianity with favor, commanded the scriptures to be translated into Chinese, and that churches be built. There's probably a church they found still erect, and they found a lot of the scriptures, the Alopan and others, translated into Chinese, and the Turfan Oasis. So there's a lot of Chinese Christians. So there's a chance that many of the Chinese Christian families, their ancestors are probably belong to the Church of the East, because Chinese missionaries went to China. So the Assyrian Church of the East had these churches, right? So then you have the Assyrian Church of the East is in decline. They're not able to maintain their Christian communities. The Catholic missionaries come over and take over. The Nestorians take over the churches. This is documented that they did that. They just go in there and hostile takeover of Assyrian churches. So now, so what I'm saying is that it's possible that a lot of Chinese Catholics, if you trace their family back, there's potential that some of them, their families go back to the Assyrian Church of the East. But at any rate, this is an important part. And to me it's fascinating because, I love the Western Christendom model of Christianity, but that is an expression of Christianity. It's not the only authentic expression of Christianity. I've talked about this in other lectures. We have four branches of Christianity. The presumption, the arrogance of the Catholic Pope is, we're the be-all and end-all of Christianity. I am the Pope. I am the only authentic church. It's not true. It's not true. It's never true. There's four ancient expressions of Christianity. One is the Aramaic expression, which is seen in the Aramaic churches, the Syriac churches, the Assyrian Church of the East, the Syrian Orthodox Church, other Syriac churches like the Maronite Church, Chaldean Church, Syriac Catholic churches. So you have the Aramaic churches. That's the oldest, because Jesus and the apostles are speaking Aramaic. This is the oldest expression of Christianity. Greek, the New Testament is written in Greek. You have that great Christian civilization of the Eastern Roman Empire, Byzantium, all the church fathers writing in Greek. This is the second most oldest expression of Christianity. Then we get to Johnny-come-lately, the arrogant and presumptuous Roman Catholic Latin church fathers. And most of the early Latin church fathers were not European. Tertullian and Augustine were North Africans. They were Latin speakers in North Africa. But here you have the Latin church seen by the Roman Catholic Church. It's a great ancient historic faith, maybe arrogant and condescending, but one of the ancient traditions nonetheless. Then we have the African branch of Christianity, Coptic and Orthodox. Coptic Orthodox and Ethiopian. You also had Nubian and the Sudanese, but Muslims wiped those communities out. But we still have the Coptic Church. We have the Ethiopian and Eritrean churches. Unfortunately, through genocide, some of those ancient churches are gone, and all we have is fragments of texts and ruins of churches, just totally eradicated. But that's still, these are four living ancient Christian traditions that should be honored and respected. And I don't think one should dominate the others. I find it offensive with these arrogant claims. And I've been studying about the papacy. You actually had an era of the Catholic Church, the papacy, called the pornocracy, where literally prostitutes was a family. These two prostitutes were running the Catholic Church and installing popes. I mean, just look it up yourself. I mean, just so much corruption and sacrilege throughout history in the papacy. I have a problem with it, honestly. It's offensive. It's an insult to St. Peter, and it's throughout the history. It's an embarrassment. But Marao is giving a presentation on Chinese Christianity. It looks like he's giving it in China. That's good. And David Tan, you had these Chinese Christians over there who are wanting to join the Assyrian Church of the East. They have not been admitted yet, and I don't know if that's going to happen. I want to mention a friend of mine, Nahreen Enwaya. She's in Michigan, and she's an Assyrian activist. She's been on the Sean Hannity show several times. And she's actually, like me, she's a Trump supporter. And she was trying to, there's overt voter fraud going on in Michigan. And she was an official election observer. And they punched her out because she was trying to document and safeguard the election. And they beat her up. And she's a mother now, but when I met her, Nahreen Enwaya she's a little woman and very, very thin. It's like, man, she's so thin. I thought she's like borderline. And look, that's her. That's who she is. She's a beautiful person, but she's very slender. And I was very deeply infuriated and insulted. How dare they beat her up, assault her for trying to, do her job as an election observer. So she's doing a conference called Genocide Exposed, Assyrian Chaldeans Syriacs. We are one blood, one nation. It says we are seeking individuals to deliver testimonies of the victims in Iraq. You are their voices. If you don't have a testimony and would like to voice a demand from our government, please submit your request for review before deliverance the date of the rally. This rally, so Marawa's presentation is going to be the 18th of October. I guess in China, it's kind of to understand the instructions. This is this Genocide Exposed, Assyrian Chaldeans and Syriacs. This is going to be on October 26th at Bellagio Banquet Hall in, Detroit, Michigan. East 14 Mile Road. I also want to mention that Julani al-Shara, the Islamist ISIS dictator of Syria, is at it again. They're going to the Christian villages and killing Christians now. Some Christians have been shot in drive-bys. Radical militiamen are going around bullying, harassing, intimidating, frightening Christians in Syria. Now that the international community has allowed an ISIS fighter to be installed as dictator of Syria, and they just had an election, and Ashara has saw to it that there are hardly any women in the parliament, and very few Christians. He does, like I said, the same thing in Egypt. They don't want women, and they don't want Christian to have representation in their governments. So I want to mention an important Aramaic scholar, and this is Professor Arthur Vobis. He was Estonian, and the Estonians speak a language related to French. This is the Baltic states, but Estonia, like I said, they have connections with Finland, right? I think their languages are mutually intelligible. But this is I believe he's a Lutheran pastor, and he was a very important Aramaic scholar. He traveled across the Middle East collecting important Aramaic manuscripts, and I don't think that his collection has been fully documented yet. I think it's in the process of being organized to this day. But one of the most important Aramaic scholars, and he wrote a book called The Threat of Communism and the Task of Christians. We have Mandani. This is a Democrat who is a communist. He is an Islamist, terrorist-supporting, anti-Semitic, and he's going to be the mayor of New York City, according to all the polls. So 25 years after September 11th, the people of New York are bequeathing this one of the most important cities in the United States of America is going to be gifted by the people. The voters of New York City are going to gift this city to Islam, to a terrorist supporter. Mandani, the guy's not even an American, who lied on his immigration papers, who should have his citizen, because he lied about it, he should have his citizenship revoked. And we got the emergent communist dominance of the Democrat Party. You know, I think the Democrat Party has always been bad, in my opinion. But I know it's worse. And I know there used to be well-meaning Democrats. But the party's changed. And they shot Charlie Kirk through the neck and killed him. And then they gloated about it and celebrated it. They're communist and they're evil. Come ye out from among them. Possess the mind of Christ. Do not give in to this antichrist thinking. So God bless Professor Vobis for all he did for the Assyrian people, for all he did for Aramaic and Syriac studies, and promoting this field of scholarship and research, and collecting, preserving these manuscripts, and encouraging the study of Aramaic and the Aramaic churches. But also, I think, because we can't mince words anymore. We're talking about the survival of human civilization. And, you know, I didn't write the Communist Manifesto. I'm not the one responsible for all these extremists taking over our campuses. But you have to react to it. We have a moral obligation to react to it. I also want to mention this man called Shadi Kalul. It's like, who is this guy? And he's in northern Israel. He's an Israeli Arab. And he's a Maronite. And he's trying to promote the study of Aramaic among the Maronite population of Israel. That's good. Now, the Maronites spoke Aramaic until the 1800s, and then it finally died out. And you have a big Aramaic influence on Levantine Arabic. A lot of the vocabulary and some of the grammar and has been influenced by Aramaic in that region, because they spoke Aramaic, and then finally a similar Semitic language, Arabic, was able to dominate. But some Aramaic speakers do not consider themselves Assyrians, like Shadi Kulul. And I guess it's true, because the Assyrians are Aramaic speakers, and they have their own dialect of Aramaic in Mesopotamia. So when you have Malula or, in Lebanon, these people are Aramaic. But, I mean, they need to be united. It's like they need to see that they have common interests, right? Even if you're a Maronite or Malulan, or we're still part of a Aramaic community. So he doesn't. It's like, I'm not Assyrian. I'm an Aramaic person, but I'm not Assyrian. I guess that's true, and but still, we need to be united and not have these little petty differences, especially when so much is at stake. We have to be, like I said, the Muslims think strategically, right? So the Chinese and the Muslims trying to dominate Africa. So they look at Africa, it's like, we want this continent. They're willing to make sacrifices and endure the corruption and other issues to achieve their goals. The gospel, everybody needs the gospel. Africa needs the gospel. And it's majority Christian. We cannot allow Africa to be lost to radical Islam. We cannot allow these terrorist groups to win. And Victor Davis Hanson was like, he was talking about, it's like the Greek Americans. Today, right now, Turkey is occupying half of the island of Cyprus. Even though Cyprus is 20% of the population was Turkish. The Turks went in there and they took over half the island. Why did they do that? Because Cyprus was thinking of joining Greece. And if Cyprus became part of Greece, then the territory, even though you're looking at waters, the territorial waters, the size of Greece would equal that of Turkey. And Turkey's half Kurdish anyway. They're very sensitive and scared and afraid. So why did the international community allow Turkey to, or like Victor Davis Hanson said right now, Assyrians and Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh. The news media didn't report on that. To hell with these people. To hell with the news media. We can't be plugged into these people anymore. We got to tell our own stories. We cannot allow this. And it's probably the CIA determining which they want you to see and which they want you to talk about. And they don't want to talk about genocide going on right now of Armenians and Assyrians. So in conclusion, we should be concerned about these issues. Why, you look at one of Jesus' disciples was called Simon the Zealot. And people dispute what that means. He probably was a zealot before he's probably was fighting against the Romans, and then he became a disciple of Jesus Christ, Jesus of Nazareth, Yeshua. But other scholars said, no, this man was just a man that had zeal. He believed in something. These idiot progressive communists, they believe in something. This asinine, demonic, stupid, failed ideology that led to the death of 100 million people in the 20th century. Communism. We've allowed them to infest and corrupt like a cancer, pollute our universities, poison the mind of our young people against their country, against their families. It's sick. But they have zeal. These Democrats have zeal. They're willing to further, conservatives want to sit around home, stuff their face, sit in the couch watching Netflix, stuffing their face with Cheetos. That's what we want to do. They want to go out there and change the world. They have zeal to change the world. While we're lazy, apathetic, and indifferent, and the Muslims, they have zeal for their stupid. The Quran's terrible. It's not worth dying for or living for, that system. It's horrible. I feel sorry for people living under radical Islam. It's a danger to everybody around the world. We need to just say the truth. Truth hurts, but we're going to have more human suffering if we don't speak the truth. One of my idiot family members, it's like, so I was talking about, we look at Israel, and it's like we shouldn't hate the Jews. I don't believe in the religion of Judaism. I'm a Christian. But these are human beings. It's like, well, the Muslims they aren't Christians either. But you have one Israeli nation, one Jewish nation, and you have how many, Islam's the second largest religion in the world, over, a billion Muslims, and they think they're going to grow and they want to dominate the world and destroy Christianity. You have conspiracy theories, but the Jews aren't really able to effectuate that. The Muslims potentially can. What will happen if they prevail? All right, we're going to look at this Aramaic text about the appearance of Paul. This is in the Acts of Paul and Thecla. And the Syriac text describes Paul as a man of middling size. His hair was scanty, his legs were a little crooked or bow-legged, and he had knees that were projecting, and he had, I'm going to read more of his description. So, scholars looking at these apocryphal acts, and I can have these stories in my book on Abdius of Babylon. This is the first volume, the Further Acts of the Apostles, and I came up with the supplementary volume. Volume 3 is coming out. But most of these books, they're different versions looking at it differently. I mean, if you're really interested in the subject, but so some of the information, this is like a study guide. This is just a reconstruction of Abdius of Babylon, but this goes into, each book has different information, but some of it's repetitive. I got a different purpose for each book. But these apocryphal acts were all written around the year 150. And the Acts of Paul is based on oral tradition. So someone's father or grandfather knew Paul or saw him, and whoever wrote the Acts of Paul was able to go and engage these communities, talk to people who had oral tradition, whose grandfather, father, or great-grandfather knew Paul. And so some of these stories might have grown with the telling. They're legendary, and there's a lot of embellishments on it, but someone took the oral traditions and wrote them down in the Acts of Paul. So there could be some historical background to it. It could be based loosely on a true story. So all these apocryphal acts probably had some historical basis, but they're not historical accounts at all. They're written much too late. The basic framework of the story probably is true, but a lot of legendary, sensational embellishments to these stories. But it's very interesting. You have this depiction, a description of what Paul the Apostle looked like. So Paul travels to Iconium in the Acts of Paul, as he does in Acts chapter 13, verse 51. Now, if you read Paul's epistles, he alludes to a lot of adventures that he had in missionary exploits that aren't recorded in the book of the Acts of the Apostles. So Paul alludes to and references some of his other acts that are not written in the book of Acts. And the Acts of Paul probably, some of the stories told there also probably have a historical basis, even though some of the stories are kind of legendary as well. So perhaps a lot more went on in Iconium and other places in the Acts. Acts just gives a brief description of what happened, and things might have been a lot more complex and more adventurous and stories that were written down by Luke. So Paul travels to Iconium, as we see in Acts chapter 13:51, proclaiming the word of God about abstinence and resurrection. Paul is given a full physical description that may reflect oral tradition. In the Syriac Aramaic text, it says he was a man of middling size, and his hair was scanty, he was balding. His legs were a little crooked, and his eyes were projecting, and he had large eyes. His eyebrows met, and his nose was somewhat long, and he was full of grace and mercy. At one time he seemed like a man, another time he seemed like an angel. While in Iconium, Paul gave his sermons in the house of Onesiphorus, who's mentioned in 2 Timothy 1:16, in a series of Beatitudes in which Thecla, a young noble virgin, heard from her window in an adjacent house. She listened in rapture without moving. And I've been to the village, one of the villages at Malula. Thecla, the shrine of Saint Thecla, and where she escaped from her oppressors, is in Syria, in the city of Malula, which is an Aramaic-speaking village. So I was able to retrace some of, even though this is farther north in Iconium, the tradition is she was also in Malula in Syria. And I was able to see those sites. And Malula is an Aramaic-speaking village. So it's interesting. Maybe the author of the Acts of Paul spoke to an old man who had seen Paul, and he gave this description, or a description that someone's father gave him about. So this is probably actually a genuine description of what St. Paul looked like, and Paul himself says that he wasn't impressive in appearance, that as his critics were saying, and as we see in this Aramaic account. So the Lord doesn't look at our outward appearance; He looks in our heart. So we need to be organized, and like I was saying, we see persecution around the world, and we're starting to see persecution here in the United States of America. In Egypt, a lot of the persecution that goes on in Egypt is through radical Muslim groups, not governmental forces, but just radical Muslims in Egypt attacking churches. Under General Sisi, the new leader of, well, he's been in power for a while now, but you had Mubarak. Mubarak fell. They brought in a Muslim extremist named Morsi. Thankfully, his regime fell, and a moderate Muslim, General Sisi, was able to take over in Egypt. And you don't hear, I'm sure there's persecution in Egypt, but it used to be very often because Mubarak would not really punish. He's probably afraid. There's a large minority of radical Muslims. So whatever the reason was, he would not harshly put down radical Muslims, even though if they carried out, they go into a church and mow down the congregation with machine guns, they would get away with it for the most part under Mubarak. So that's not going on too much. General Sisi's a much better leader, obviously. Egypt is better under him. The Christian population is better under him. He's doing more to protect them. But what I'm saying is under Mubarak, it wasn't the Morsi, the radical Islamic leader. He was sending government forces to attack and kill Christians in the streets. But Mubarak was not overtly persecuting to that degree. He was not punishing radical Muslim groups for carrying out attacks. So the situation in Egypt under Mubarak is you have these radical Muslim groups who would attack churches, kill Christians, go into churches with machine guns and mow down a congregation. Because of radical secular progressives, because of the Democrat Party. Look, there's this, this is going on right now. I think this is in Virginia. Once again, we have a Democrat candidate. He's not being condemned by the Democrat Party. He was saying that if there's a Republican and there's Pol Pot, he says, if I had a gun, this is what this man said. He says, if I had a gun and it had 2 bullets and I had Hitler, Pol Pot, and a Republican, this Democrat said I would put 2 bullets in the Republican. I'd spare Hitler and Pol Pot. And the Democrat Party is not condemning this man and he says, I want to kill the children, little boys and girls of Republicans. This is what this Democrat candidate is saying. And the Democrat Party is not condemning him for it. A lot of Democrats celebrated the death of Charlie Kirk. So we've had Sutherland Springs, outside of San Antonio, a radical Democrat leftist went to a church and mowed down a congregation. We had an attempted attack in White Settlement, outside of Dallas. We had a church school massacre in Nashville, a radical Democrat transgendered activist, and then in a church in Milwaukee, a Catholic church during Mass, killing children. These are left-wing, progressive, transgender radical terrorists. This is happening if we read about this happening in Nigeria, in Egypt, and other places, we'd be appalled. This is happening in the United States of America right now. So Charlie Kirk, a young man talking to people, sits up at a table and talking to people about Jesus, and he gets shot in the neck through it, and then tens of thousands, probably millions of Democrats celebrate his death. Where are we at? And that's why we have to be very blunt and forceful, because it's happening in the United States of America right now. And like I said, 25 years after 9/11, the people of New York, Democrats, vote in a terrorist-loving, supporting, a man that says globalize the Intifada, globalize jihad. Mamdani, a man who committed immigration fraud, who's not an American, a Muslim extremist, a radical Muslim extremist, is most likely soon going to be the mayor, the 25th anniversary celebration of this terrible terrorist attack. The Democrat Party gives to the Islamic world, New York City, submits that city to Islamic world in just a few weeks. So we're in a bad situation in a way, and we need to have zeal. We need to have zeal like these people do. Why don't we have zeal? We need to be filled with the Holy Spirit. When the Holy Spirit comes upon us, we need to have at least zeal to match the left-wingers and the radical Muslims. And part of this is just thinking. For God's sake, just thinking about it. Just look at a map and working together to achieve goals. We have good goals. We want life and peace and blessings. Like going over there and digging wells and helping people live a better life and have clean water so they can live out their regular lifespan with health and prosperity and opportunity and families. We want what's best for these people. While Islam doesn't really care about how people live and how they suffer, all they want is dominion over them through this draconian, tyrannical, evil system of Sharia law. It's anti-human. It's a threat to mankind and to human civilization, and it has to be opposed. We have a better way. We have the good news of the kingdom of God, and we need to be advancing it, not retreating it, but advancing it. Why in God's name do we put up with sending our kids to college and university, we're taking them to church, trying to instill godly Christian values in them, but we send them to a godless, atheist institution and have our kids come back home hating God, hating the Bible, hating their parents? Why do we put up with this? Nobody's done anything against it until Donald Trump. Trump's like, we give you all this money. And the other thing Trump said, these things seem incidental, but they're very important. Like, Trump goes to the Smithsonian. It's like, here it is, right outside our Capitol, and all your museum displays are hatred against the United States of America, hatred against our way of life, hatred against our ideals of freedom and equality and opportunity, against our Constitution and the ideas and principles of freedom and liberty and representation, government, everything. Every single display in this museum is hating on America. Why? What benefit does this do? Doesn't do any benefit. This does not support the common good. This is detrimental. And it's like, we're paying for these Smithsonian institution for you to poison the mind of our our children against our own country, to destroy the foundations of our great republic. And it's like, we're not putting up with it. We're not putting up with this crap anymore. And the Babylon Bee, whew, they had this story about Muhammad. It's kind of funny. And it's like, this is very bold of them. The headline, the Babylon Bee, Muhammad upset as Democrats keep calling Islam a religion of peace. And the byline is, where is this story being reported from? Hell. The founder of Islam expressed continued frustration with Democrats on Wednesday, calling them out for referring to Islam as a religion of peace. I literally created this religion by murdering people and threatening to murder people, said an exasperated Muhammad. How do I not get any credit for all that violence? Sometimes it feels like I almost killed all those people for nothing. It's so disheartening. So sometimes we just gotta tell it the way it is, for the benefit of mankind and for our children. What kind of future are we gonna leave for our kids if we don't? We're failing them. We're failing posterity, humanity, ourselves. That's one thing that these people say, oh, if we don't do anything about these issues, our grandkids are going to suffer so much. It's not going to be your grandkids. It's not going to be your kids. We're going to see this potentially. You're going to see the devastation and decline and trauma and collapse. It's not going to be far off as you think it is. The time to pay the piper could become a lot sooner than you think. So that's why we need to confront these issues and try to come up with solutions. And like I said, Speaker's Corner in England, you got these Muslims blaspheming, insulting Jesus and the apostles and Paul, and casting aspersions upon our scriptures and our church fathers. And it's not, we got to be nice as Christians. We just got to, no. We got to stand up. Like I said, where would we be as a church? Where would we be as a church if not for the Frankish battle axe? All these benefits you enjoy of Western society were won because of what Charles Martel and his Frankish warriors did. Think about that. You had these hordes of Muslims coming. They had to stand out there with the line with this battle axe, and they piles of body on the ground fighting for Christ. We have the idea of Jesus says, love your enemy, turn the other cheek, love people. But if you want to be able to practice those ideals, the Muslims don't share those ideals. They're not going to allow you to practice those ideals. And it's unfortunate, when Jesus comes, there's going to be a battle of Armageddon. He's going to be, it says the forces of Antichrist are going to fight against Christ at his second coming. And there's going to be such terrible bloodshed. It says in the book of Revelation that blood is going to flow like a river up to the horse's bridle. I don't like to see violence, blood, and worship, but I don't want to see the gospel light extinguished. It talks about that in the book of Revelation. You have these lamps on the lampstand. Is the light going to be put out? If we don't confront the left-wing socialist progressives, we don't confront radical Islam. I love it's not Saint because he's more of a Protestant than a Catholic, but Tertullian of Carthage, a church father. He had the statement, the blood of the martyrs is the seed of the church. With the Roman Empire, persecution was sporadic and intermittent. It wasn't long-sustained persecution, as it is under the Muslims. Long-sustained persecution by Muslims has led, it's a fact, it's a historical fact, to the extinguishing of the light of Christianity. Look at Algeria today. There's almost no Christians there, and this was the place where Western Christianity was born. The Christian intellectuals of Tertullian of Carthage, St. Augustine, who's the underpinnings of the Protestant Reformation. Both Luther was an Augustinian monk. Calvin quotes almost more than he does the Bible. He quotes from so-called St. Augustine. The intellectual underpinnings of Christianity from Tertullian and so-called St. Augustine. And there's no Christians there because the Muslims went in there and they don't let up. They persecute, and then there's no Christians left. It's happened. This is reality. It's not, these ideals. This is what happens when you have long-sustained persecution. And if we don't support the Assyrian community in the Middle East, there's not going to be any Assyrian Christians over there anymore. Their numbers have dwindled. They've been decimated. So, I'm optimistic. I believe God's going to intervene. So I hope you watch this program. it's time for, these different Protestant denominations, the Southern Baptist Convention, the Assemblies of God, and others. We need to unite, just like the Muslims, and be strategic. We don't want to hurt people. We want to help people. We have our brothers and sisters in Christ who are suffering, and we have the means to help them. The Muslims have the means to hurt them, and they're doing it. And we need to intervene while we have the capacity to do it. I went over there and I stayed in Africa for a few weeks to see what's going on, to help our brothers and sisters in Christ as I could. I've tried to do what I can. We need to do more. And I'm willing to go back and build on my efforts in the future. But it's time for us to confront these realities and address these problems and situations. So please support my work. If you want to at least buy my book, you can give it to my church, King of Saints in Cleveland, Texas. And like, share, and subscribe to these videos as we put out the truth and fight through peaceful means as much as we can to advance the glory of the gospel of Jesus Christ.